The Apprentice. Written and read by Ken Johnson. Episode 9. The phone on Horatio's desk trilled. "Horatio," said Horatio. "Who was that lady I saw you with last night?" The voice was Gresham's. "What? Was she your date?" "I'm sorry, Gresham, I'm not really with you." "I was in the King's Unicorn last night, but you didn't notice me. Was she your date?" Yes, she was. We had a drink. We chatted for a few minutes." "It's okay. She's really nice. And I didn't need the full after-action report. The first thing I need to know is, are you still going to date me?" "Of course. Any time." "Well, that's all right then. I didn't want to think that you'd found someone else." "I'll always have time for you, sweetie," said Horatio. "So why is Jory Hodgson still alive?" "I didn't know." "I thought you said—" "I said, I think I've got a solution to a problem. You got 10 minutes?" To a problem that isn't what went wrong." "No, to your what to tell the management problem." "That would do, wouldn't it?" "Well, I haven't worked out why Jory Hodgson is still alive, so any port in a storm, really." Gresham thought for a moment. "Are you thirsty?" "Not particularly." "See you in the canteen in 10 minutes, then. I could murder a cup of tea." Horatio and Gresham sat opposite each other, behind cups of tea and far enough from the admonition on the wall not to discuss work to forget that it existed. "So, you see," Gresham began, "I was at home about midnight and I was watching Fraud Squad on telly when I had this idea." "Sounds excellent so far." "I have my best ideas when I'm watching crime shows, and fortunately there's not much else." "So, what are we going to do?" "We'll write a report saying that Hodgson was never infected." "That's taking a bit of a risk, isn't it?" "Not if we have evidence." Gresham enthused. "I can get 2 samples of my own blood, put Hodgson's labels on both of them in 2 different handwritings with different dates. That will do for evidence." "Well, it's the best idea we've had between us so far. What could possibly go wrong?" "Quite a lot, now I come to think of it." "But it's the only idea we have, apart from investigating exactly what went wrong and reporting on how to fix it, of course." "Let's cut your idea loose from its moorings," Horatio continued. "Take it for a sail across the Cromarty Firth and see whether it floats. The first problem I can see is, how would you get 2 samples of your own blood in NHS pattern containers?" "I was wondering that as well," said Gresham, "but then I thought there must be some old sample tubes lying around somewhere." "I see." Horatio thought for a moment. "I have to admit it's a good idea. You hand over 2 vials of your own blood, and we pass them off as Jory Hodgson's blood, one before he was inoculated with the product, and one after we thought he had been inoculated with it, but he really hadn't. Have I got the idea?" "You certainly have," said Gresham. "That's exactly right." "I'd still feel a lot happier if we had the answers to some fairly basic questions, though. So, since we're not under any great pressure to have an answer by going home time this evening, I'd like to call the plan that we haven't thought of yet Plan A, and call the brilliant idea that you've just suggested Plan B." "What's the B stand for?" "It doesn't stand for anything. It means the second." "You mean you didn't have a Plan A, so mine has to be Plan B." "Yeah, that's it. I don't have a fully formed Plan A, but yours is good enough for an emergency, so I'm going to call it Plan B." "Supposing you didn't have a Plan A or a Plan B, then my plan would have to be Plan C, is that right?" "No, your plan would still be plan B, and the second plan that we haven't got would be plan C, I think. To be honest, I'm becoming a trifle confused. Before we start putting paint to paper and turning out the masterpiece that plan A is sure to be, let's try to draw some preliminary pencil sketches of plan A. What questions do we need answers to? Well, for a start, Gresham thought for a moment, there's if Hodgson wasn't injected with this stuff, who was and what happened to him? And then Horatio took up the theme, who mistakenly injected it into the wrong person? And if nobody injected it into the wrong person, where is the dose of product now? You can see that some people might possibly worry about that sort of thing. Gresham asked, do you have a plan A? No, Horatio said, not yet. How about plan C? No, I haven't got that either. Gresham stared out of the window for a moment. Two huge crows were chasing each other in circles above the moorland that separated the works from the town. He sighed. Ah, if only they could talk. Who? Horatio hadn't seen the crows. Them crows there. If only they could talk. But crows can talk, Horatio pointed out. They can learn to speak like parrots. Well, Gresham proposed, I'll open the window, and maybe one of them will fly in here and talk to us. The crows landed in a tree and looked around them. Gresham didn't open the window. Supposing it did. Even though it stopped at all stations and in between them as well, Horatio was, as sometimes happened, unable to guess the destination of Gresham's train of thought. Well, maybe one of them saw something. Supposing one of them did. Where would that get us? Well, the one that saw it would tell all the others. They'd all have heard the story by now. One or other of the crows could tell us the gossip. Why Jory Hodgson is still alive. Horatio thought that unlikely. I think he'd just make a wild guess. He'd just say some interfering bastard must have done it, which would have us all barking up the wrong tree. There is a proverb, Gresham said after a pause for thought. The people singing the wrong words are the people what wrote the right ones. Does that help us? It's a Ukrainian proverb I just made up. Who started this line of research in the first place years ago? Daniel Newman, said Horatio. Last I heard, he was still at St. Hubert's, doing the odd spot of work whenever he felt like it. Perhaps he can spare us 10 minutes, said Gresham. Like the Victorian prisons and the Victorian schools and the Victorian lunatic asylums, the buildings that comprised St. Hubert's University were intended to uplift, soothe and delight the souls of their occupants, as well as to impress visitors and passers-by. Here, in these buildings, you felt as you walked along the sonorously named Maxwell Highway or across the Golden Bridge. Men and women become great by achieving great things. Theodore and Gresham left the Glentinny Hotel in Balgour the next morning and struck out along the riverside path to the Life Science Palace. Every academic building in St. Hubert's University was, famously, either a reconstruction of an impressive Scottish building or an original Scottish building transported brick by brick and reassembled on site. The design of the Glentinny Hotel was squarely based on the Gleneagles Hotel in Perthshire, although a lot smaller, and the Life Science Palace was pretty much a replica of Brodie Castle in Morayshire, with the addition of lifts, fire escapes, whiteboards, a ground floor burger bar with vegetarian options, and electricity. Professor Newman was pleased to see them. A bearded figure, either approaching retirement or already retired but unable to stop working. He welcomed Horatio and Gresham into his office. He talked to them while staring out of the window at the lawn and burn. Patch, his large and somnolent golden retriever, lay on the floor. Patch looked up as the two former students entered the office, then lay down again and closed his eyes. "I haven't seen either of you for a while. How have you been getting along?" "We're both walking for sunlight, Professor," said Gresham, "so we can't say that much." "You can tell me more or less anything," said Professor Newman. "I helped to set the place up. The research they're doing is my idea. Did you get a chance to read my book?" "Small-scale warfare. Yes, I've read the first 3 chapters," said Theodore. Tell him to read it," said Gresham. 3 down, 5 to go, then. It's reassuring that you understand the need for secrecy, but fortunately, I still have Sunlight Staff ID. I hope your jobs suit you, because nothing's worse than a job you don't like. Go ahead, tell me what's on your mind, and call me Daniel, for goodness sake. "We're trying to find out how a patient survived." "Shh! Quiet for the moment." From his desk, Professor Newman picked up an old and well-worn notepad, a pencil, and a small silver telescope. "I can hear the 9:30 from Stirling." Patch stood up slowly and with great effort. "Come on." The professor urged the dog towards the window. "You'll miss it." Patch parked his lower jaw on the window ledge and looked out of the window while Professor Newman stared out of it through the small telescope. A train approached the station on the farther bank of the burn, and he wrote something on the notepad. "What is it, Daniel?" Horatio asked. "Is everything all right?" "It's 107426, Class 107. That ought to be in a museum by now." The professor put the pad, pencil, and telescope back onto the desk and turned back to the visitors. "Honestly, they keep these old war horses going until they fall to pieces." Patch wandered back to his place on the carpet, lay down and closed his eyes. "You're trying to find out how a patient survived," Professor Newman reminded himself. "Survived a weapons test," Horatio said, and realized immediately from the expression on Daniel's face that he had said the wrong thing. "Never call it a weapons test," he growled, "even though it is one. It's a drug trial. We're trying to find out how a patient survived a drug trial." "Well, let's see. What do you know about the patient?" "Serial number 155. Male, aged 43, lives in a big house on Sandpiper Terrace in Loch Kelt," Horatio volunteered. He paused for breath and went on. "Wife, 2 children. Is that all you know about him?" "Except that he's still alive, yes, and he has a degree in performing arts." "Fat lot of good that is." Well, everybody has to start somewhere." Professor Newman asked them to hold on a moment and rummaged in his desk. Eventually, he took a sheet of paper from the lowest drawer. "Serial number 155, you say?" 155, said Horatio. "He was on my list, see? Here." He pointed at the entry. "Is. Now, I had one of my students administer the drug, Wayne Crawford. He'll be in tomorrow. Could we go and visit him at home or at work?" "There wouldn't be much point," said Daniel, "because he'll be off his face on some exotic substance. Now, come in tomorrow, and I'll make sure he speaks to you. I don't think I can do much else to help, but if I think of anything, meanwhile, find something interesting to do this afternoon. This is a great university with a unique history." Suddenly, Patch barked loudly twice. "Thanks," Daniel said to the dog. "I'll take a look." Both he and the dog returned to the window, and Daniel scoured the landscape through his telescope. Yes, Patch, you're absolutely right as always. It's a train of 4 container wagons headed by a Class 66. 66502 it looks like. Remember that for me because I forgot my pencil. He turned to Horatio and Gresham as Patch carried on gazing out of the window. Patch loves these trains. I guess it's another building being brought CKD from some faraway hill or valley, ready to be turned into a thriving university department. That locomotive has enough horsepower to pull St. Mary's Cathedral. Patch opened his eyes for a few seconds. Yes, Patch, it is hauling St. Mary's Cathedral. The spirit of Victoria Vincent lives on, God rest her immortal soul, now appearing in the shape of 6 clones of Mr. Bumble who live in a room marked Board of Trustees.